Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com, and we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by Auth0. Auth0 makes authentication easy. We love building things that are fun, and let's face it, authentication isn't fun. Authentication is a pain. It can take hours to implement, and even after you have your authentication in place, you have to keep your code secure, up to date. It's a mess. Auth0 makes it easy and fast to implement real-world authentication and authorization architectures into your apps and APIs. You can allow your users to log in however you want, regular username and password, Facebook, Twitter, enterprise identity providers like AD and Office 365, or let them log in without passwords just like Slack or WhatsApp. To get started, grab the Auth0 SDK for your platform, add a few lines of code to your project. This can be a mobile app, a website, or even an API. They all need authentication. Head to auth0.io/thechangelog. That's the number 0 in Auth0, not the word. No credit card is required. Sign up for Auth0 and get the free plan, or try the enterprise plan for 21 days. Once again, auth0.io/thechangelog. Again, the number 0 in Auth0, not the word 0, and tell them Changelog sent you. You're listening to The Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, leaders, and innovators of open source. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief of Changelog. Mike Perham is making his 4th appearance on The Changelog today to talk about his new project, Faktory, a new background job system that's aiming to bring the best practices he's developed over the last 5 years in Sidekiq to every programming language. We catch up with Mike on Sidekiq, the future of background jobs, his thoughts on RocksDB and Faktory versus BoltDB, Redis, or SQLite, how he plans to support Sidekiq for the next 10 years, and his thoughts on Faktory being a SaaS option in the future. So Mike, this is your 4th time back on the show. I mean, obviously we love you, man. We love having you back. Episode 92, episode 130, episode 159, Sidekiq, Inspector, and obviously sustaining open source. But how do you feel to be back on the show? You're like an OG around,
a regular,
basically. A regular. It's like Cheers. Everybody knows your name.
Maybe I should host the show for a little bit.
That's not a bad idea.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for having me back, and you know, it's pretty impressive that y'all have stayed around that long and just continued with this podcast for so long. It's quite an achievement.
I think this would be roughly episode 270 something ish. So we're in the 270s. Not bad.
Mm-hmm. Not bad.
Wow.
Around for roughly 8-ish years almost.
That's incredible.
Well, we're still here and you're still here as well, which also is quite impressive. Years and years of putting out awesome open source and also running a business around it. So congratulations on you also still being here after all these years.
Thank you. I think we both had interesting journeys.
Yeah.
Certainly off the beaten path.
It is off the beaten path. Well, on that note, let's catch up a bit. I mean, I know that we can easily send folks back to those episodes and do a full on, but you know, you got kind of the main topic today, Faktory, but what's going on with Sidekiq? That's like your claim to fame, so to speak. You know, you're sustaining an open source, so to speak. Then you came out with Inspector. What's going new? What's new for you?
Yeah, so Sidekiq is definitely my meat and potatoes. That's what's paying the bills right now. But you know, I've made my career for the last 5 years on background jobs, and so I've done, you know, over the last year, I've done some thinking about new directions that Sidekiq's architecture does not allow. So where I went with that is building a new system called Faktory, which is sort of an inverse to the design of Sidekiq. And part of that inversion allows it to be language independent. So whereas Sidekiq is tied to Ruby and sort of limits me and my customer base to people running Ruby, Faktory is designed to be language independent. And so you can use Faktory with any language. So the idea is that I can come out with this sort of opinionated background job framework that's useful for any business application. And it doesn't matter what language you're authoring your business application in. You can leverage Faktory as infrastructure to scale your app. And we'll see how that goes. It's still early days, obviously, but this is something that I want to put my efforts into over the next year and see what I can make happen. So toward that end, I 2 weeks ago, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, first announced Faktory and unveiled it, and so I'm approaching the sort of second alpha release this week, and then over the next few months, it'll just be the sort of the daily drudgery of building up a new large system, and hopefully building a new separate division of my business, so to speak, around Faktory and possible commercial variants.
Have you hired anybody yet? Are you still solo? What's the scenario there?
Yeah, I'm still solo today, but I'm thinking that if Faktory is successful and I get a commercial variant that is selling well and it looks like it is sustainable, then I probably would hire one or two people to join me in the effort of maintaining this, because ultimately my vision for Faktory is an order of magnitude larger than Sidekiq, and at that scale, at that size, I think I sort of run out of steam. Yeah. And I'll need help to support the number of customers that I have and that sort of thing.
We don't want you to burn out, right? Or work too hard. Exactly, one of the two. What's that? Working too hard, burning out. Is that the same thing?
One can lead to the other for sure.
Mm-hmm. This move kind of reminds me of Heroku's move back in the day. I don't remember when it was anymore, but they were originally, all the way originally, they were actually like a web IDE for Rails, which was cool, but wasn't really a product that people were buying. Then they were a hosting platform for Ruby on Rails. And then they took funding and, got big. And I'm not kind of sure when Salesforce acquired them, if it was before or after this move. But the shift to Polyglot from them was very much a move to broaden their customer base. And so I see your move from Sidekiq, which is Ruby based, to something that potentially can facilitate a service for lots of different languages, lots of different companies. What drives the desire for you to get that that much bigger potential customer base? Is it just want to grow in the business? Is it money? Is it you were bored? Tell us some of your drivers to say, you know what, I'm going to move outside of my meat and potatoes and try for a bigger pool.
Well, ultimately, I think background jobs are something that can benefit almost every business application out there, and a lot of the background job systems out there are language specific, like Celery, for instance, or they are language agnostic, like Beanstalk, but they are essentially abandoned now, where no one's maintaining them. And on top of that, I think a lot of the background job systems that are out there that are language agnostic don't have the years and years of additional really nice features that become super useful in building business applications. Sidekiq has sort of proven that there is a market for these frameworks that allow you to scale job processing across many machines, along with the APIs that you inevitably need when you're scaling your processing across many machines. Things like rate limiting, things like cron jobs, all this kind of stuff are really useful generic tools that I want to bring to everybody. I'm proud of the fact that Sidekiq really took jobs to the next level in the Ruby world. And so I want to do that same, taking to the next level for everybody else. And not have everybody else sort of reinventing the same thing over and over, but slightly different. If we can all standardize, I mean, with Rails, it was proven that if we all standardize sort of on one framework that everyone can use, then you can move so much faster and you can build so much more.
So you got 6 months in the works as of the announcement post, which, like you said, was a couple of weeks ago. As of the time of this recording, for those listening, it was October 24th, I believe, of 2017. 6 months in the works. You said that you kind of inverted the architecture. I guess we could just dive right in and talk about Faktory in terms of the way that you built it and all the fun nitty gritty. Tell us about this this inversion from Sidekiq and how Faktory is put together.
Yeah, so the way that Sidekiq works is that you have a centralized data store in this case it's Redis, and it's running on some machine. And then you have one or more Sidekiq processes which are talking to Redis. And that Sidekiq worker process implements all of the features that are required for job processing. And so all those features are implemented in Ruby that is running in that Sidekiq worker process. And so all those worker processes, they all talk to what I call this dumb data store, which is Redis. In that Redis doesn't have any logic in it. It just stores, bits of data. And all my logic that operates on that data is all built in Ruby. And so that's why you're locked into Ruby, because all of the advanced Sidekiq features that I sell are all implemented in Ruby also.
Right.
Now with Faktory, what I'm doing is I'm sort of embedding that data store into Faktory directly. And so Faktory is a standalone daemon, kind of like Redis, where instead of exposing a bunch of data structure operations like Redis does, I expose a bunch of job operations. And so all of my logic, all of my feature logic can be embedded in that Faktory server daemon that is sort of the central hub. And now all of your Faktory worker processes can be implemented in any language because they don't have any of those more advanced job features that need to be implemented in them. All they do is pull a job and execute it. And then tell Faktory when the job is done. And Faktory does everything else. It keeps track. It gives you the web UI so you can sort of track all the jobs that you have in your system and errors that have occurred, and showing you your sets of worker processes that you have out there and what they're working on at any given moment. And so that really makes the Faktory worker processes much simpler than the Sidekiq worker process now. And so in the last 2 weeks since I announced it, I've had people implement Faktory workers in 6 different languages, which is pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, we actually noticed that listed out there. You got Ruby, Go, Python 3, PHP, Rust, Elixir, Node, .NET. Obviously, the Ruby and the Go ones are first-party official worker libraries, or what do you call them? Worker libraries?
Yeah, client libraries, worker libraries.
Sure.
Producer consumer libraries. Yeah.
And the comment we have in the note is just kind of wow. Kind of wow how many there are already.
Pretty
considering
fast.
this is brand new. So that speaks a little bit to, I think, your reputation in the community and the fact that people are getting excited about this. It also probably speaks to what you just said, is that they are much simpler to do than the Sidekiq worker process.
Well, one of the reasons why I built Faktory is because over the last couple of years, I've heard, dozens of people ask, is there something like Sidekiq for my language? And so that tells you that there's a bit of demand there. I'm not sure if it's enough demand to warrant, venture capital investment and $100 million valuation, but that's not what I'm shooting for. I'm shooting for, ma and pa's artisanal software that I can
I love that.
sort of, build and maintain with, me or a small crew over the next decade. That's kind of the scale that I've always wanted to operate at.
Yeah. Do you ever think about the speed at which, a highly funded company, so the mom and pop, what they're concerned about usually is Walmart and Amazon and these huge, megacorps coming in and steamrolling them. First of all, have you faced any fierce competition from startups, or do you have that fear if Faktory is successful, somebody can throw 100 million into the rink and squash you?
Well, I mean, if they throw 100 million into the rink, what does that entail? What does that mean? Well, typically that means that they need to make a 10x return if that's venture capital.
Nobody invests without a return, or
right.
They want one at least.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people invest at every turn.
Which means they've got to make $1 billion. But that means that their pricing needs to be commensurate with that funding and with that profit goal. So I can keep my prices so low that it doesn't matter if some big corp wants to come in. As long as I'm making X $1,000s a year, I can sustain myself forever. It doesn't matter if Amazon comes in and Amazon's going to have SQS, RabbitMQ is a thing. There's all sorts of different queuing systems that are commercial.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the market is big enough for another entry, it's not a winner-take-all thing.
It goes back to what you said too. Like, you've gotten over the years, lots of people saying, "Hey, Mike, is there a Sidekiq for my language?" And so that's definitely indicators for, what people might call product market fit, where you've got an idea where, Sidekiq as a model has worked for Ruby, and others see it and they're excited about it and they say, well, how do I use that for my language? And now you have, waypoints to say this is a good thing to invest in.
Yeah. And people have, some of the pushback I got on my initial announcement was, oh, people should just use job library X or use Rabbit, or why would you, if you're in the cloud, why would you use this instead of SQS or something like that? But that's kind of like asking, if the Honda Accord exists, why would you buy a Toyota Camry? Or why would you buy a Ford F-150? Well, they're different things. They mean different things to different people. Different brands mean different things. They have different capabilities and different opinions and different use cases for different business apps. A business app that needs to scale to billions of jobs per day might be better off using SQS, where you can sort of scale infinitely. But your ops headache is going to be commensurate with that choice. So what I find is that the people that use my stuff tend to be smaller shops that they don't mind paying $1,000 or $2,000 to solve a problem immediately. They just don't want a lot of ops headache, and they don't want to roll their own. So they'd rather pay me to give them a pre-baked solution that has all the opinions already baked in and solves a well-known problem. And then they can get on with their life.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is? It's a secret sauce for Sidekiq that makes people want to have it for their language. So if Sidekiq is focused on Ruby, what is the secret sauce? Have you boiled that down? Do you know what that is?
Well, that's tough to say. There's an aspect of performance, because Sidekiq was certainly much higher performance than a lot of the existing Ruby solutions. It baked in a lot of features that the previous solutions all kind of separated into separate gems. So, taking the example of Rescue, one of the reasons I built Sidekiq was because Rescue forced you to integrate like 6 different gems just to get the web UI, to get retries, to get sort of a threaded model where you could get a higher performance than just forking per job. So having a strong opinion about how to bake all this stuff into one sort of comprehensive, singular package is important to some people. It certainly makes your ops a lot easier, where you can just depend on one easy package instead of having to sort of tie together a half a dozen different packages, all with different versions, all maintained by different people. So I think that's sort of Sidekiq's secret sauce. And in Faktory, I try to bake as much stuff into it also to try and sort of bake as much value into it, so that, because ultimately that's what people are responding to is they want to see the value in there, that this solves their problem and comes with a lot of little nice bells and whistles that they can use.
So One feature we'll talk about, I guess, a comparison, and one thing to state, since Factory is so new, it's not it doesn't have feature parity with Sidekiq. You would have released it for a while to get that done. But one thing we talk about secret sauce, or at least the bits that you make sure are coming over, is it does have a Sidekiq inspired web UI, which has become something that, as a longtime Sidekiq user, I'm just very used to the web UI being there. And so that at least seems like something that is very important to many people. Is that fair to say?
For sure. Setting up the web UI for Sidekiq for many people is can be a bit difficult, especially if they have a fairly complex web application. So baking it into Factory so that it's just a HTTP port and they can hit it with their browser really simplifies a lot of that. And it's also, going back to what I was saying before, it's a big part of the value there is it's a nice, attractive web UI that is baked in. You looked at something like Gearman or Beanstalk. I don't know that they have a UI that's built in. I think Beanstalk, the web UI does not come with it, and you have to download a third-party web UI and set that up, configure that. Whereas with Factory, it's all built into the system. But where that's useful is that because the web UI is baked into the one binary, is the versions always work together. The storage and the web UI aren't two separate things that you can possibly update separately, and then now they need to talk to each other and deal with different versions. It's just one binary. They're part of one whole. And so there's no configuration, there's no management of the things as two separate units. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like your goal to push more features into the server side, but then also to simplify in terms of deployment and management, storage, like you're removing dependencies with Redis being removed. I think we should dive into that a little bit in a minute. But have you struggled to find a balance between trying to make things simple and yet still make it feature rich inside that single binary?
Well, that's always a struggle. Keeping a system as simple as possible and considering the trade-off of complexity versus features is part and parcel to software engineering in general. But I have definitely struggled with what I can put into Factory and what I can't. There are some things where you're going to need the worker process that is executing the jobs. You're going to have to get some implementation from it for some features. For instance, the worker has to acknowledge that the job is finished, right? If it fetches a job, it has to then tell Factory, "Hey, I'm done with this now." There's simply no way to not do that. Mm-hmm. There's also things like APIs like rate limiting is one example where your job may want to do some sort of rate limited operation, and if I build that into Factory, that's fine. But the worker is going to have to call that rate limiting API to ensure that the rate limit is being enforced at any given moment. And so, yeah, there are some features that I can bake into Factory sort of transparent to the worker process, but there are others that I can't. And so that'll influence a lot of the future feature design and sort of the features that'll be in commercial versions versus the open source version.
This episode is brought to you by GoCD. GoCD is an open source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. It provides continuous delivery out of the box with its built-in pipelines, advanced traceability, and value stream visualization. With GoCD, you can easily model, orchestrate, and visualize complex workflows from end to end. It supports modern infrastructure with elastic on-demand agents and cloud deployments, and their plugin ecosystem ensures GoCD will work well in your unique environment. To learn more about GoCD, visit gocd.org/changelog. It's open source and free to use, and there's also professional support and enterprise add-ons available from ThoughtWorks. Once again, gocd.org/changelog.
So one of the major moving pieces that you've removed from Faktory, or I guess never included in Faktory, which is a big part of Sidekiq, and you mentioned it previously, is Redis. But you gotta persist at Q somewhere. So tell us about that decision to remove Redis and what you're doing instead.
Yeah, so this was quite possibly the hardest decision I had to make in designing and the initial implementation of Faktory. Obviously, you got to store data somewhere. You got to track things and persist things. And so if I wanted to invert sort of the logic and push the logic from the worker process into the actual server itself, I would need to embed a storage engine effectively. And Redis is not embeddable. Now, Redis has Lua hooks, it has modules,
right?
But all of those are not designed to build products on top of. They are designed for the end user to customize Redis for their own application. For instance, I can't package up Faktory as a module and distribute it because modules for Redis can only be, you have to compile a module into Redis. And on top of that, I'd be building on top of Redis, which, believe me, I considered for a while because I've got thousands of lines of code which already have all these features implemented for it.
Right.
So I could literally just port the system over if I wanted to, but ultimately I decided to go with an engine that could be embedded so that I could just ship a single compiled binary. And so I looked around for a bunch of different things, and the best option that I sort of landed on today is RocksDB, which is an embedded key value store that is built and maintained by Facebook. They use Rocks to power a lot of their internal services. And so to me, that production sort of quality is there. Which you never know if you're just using some random open source library.
Right.
I wanted something that had a good production usage already, and Redis obviously has tons of production usage, so it's rock solid.
Yeah.
But Rocks has proven to be extremely fast, and its production story, at least at Facebook, is also good. So, to me, that was the best option that I had. Rocks does have some trade-offs. It has some drawbacks versus Redis, but like I said, it's the best. It's the best of what's out there right now.
It's interesting to think about the long term. So if Faktory is successful and you continue building on the long term implications of that particular decision. Because, a lot of us don't consider our dependencies really well thought out anyways. But, when you're putting together, especially at like the application layer, you're putting together usually lots of different things to serve different purposes. And some dependencies, even like Sidekiq, right? Like, okay, it's pretty much the one you go to in the Ruby world now, but in its day, for background jobs, you could have reached for Rescue and Sidekiq and I think Delayed Job, although that was getting crufty at the time. So these decisions are kind of made without extreme consideration sometimes. And sometimes that bites you and sometimes it doesn't, especially if they're more, you can just swap them in and out, right? The more modular, pluggable they are, you say, well, I don't really like background job anymore. I'm going to swap out for Sidekiq. But with this decision, and anybody who's doing persistence, right? When you're selecting your persistence engine, it has huge ramifications down the road. So it's a really big decision to make. Give us some insight. Like, how did you go about? You said that it was production grade, and you like that Facebook was behind it. But what was your process? Like, what do you go about? Okay, I'm going to compare against Redis. I want something embeddable. But it sounds like you weren't completely sold against Redis at the time, even though you preferred an embedded solution. Did you just Google around, find all the embedded Go things, and then compare them? What's your style of picking a big dependency like that?
There's a couple things that I was looking for. First was that I knew that I wanted to use Go to build it. So I knew that I had to have something that would integrate with my language of choice. Number two concern was long-term support. Is this thing going to be worked on for the next, N years? Is it going to be something that I can submit a bug for and someone will look at it in days rather than months or years or never?
Right.
So you look at something like SQLite. That's a great example of a storage engine that is something that I would consider using if I wanted a SQL engine for a product like Faktory. I definitely would have gone with something like SQLite because it has proven to be long-term reliable, long-term supported, and sort of has this proven track record over multiple years. When I first was looking for storage engines, I went straight to BoltDB, which has a really good reputation in the Go community as this nice embedded key value store library. And Ben Johnson, the maintainer, has a very good reputation as a good developer. And so I looked at Bolt. Bolt is great. The problem I found, though, is that it is very slow for the use case that Faktory wants to use it for, which is a lot of inserts and deletes really fast. Bolt is more of like a binary tree type storage system where you don't necessarily insert a ton, but you maybe read a lot. So maybe for like indexes and stuff like that, it's really good. But with queues, you push a job into the queue and then you pop it off really fast. And so you're inserting and deleting usually within microseconds or milliseconds of each other. And so that's where RocksDB's design really shines, because it proved to be 100 to 1,000x faster than BoltDB. And so RocksDB's design is what's called an LSM, a log structured merge tree, I believe. The idea is that every persistence operation writes to a log, and then regularly the system will take that log and sort of persist it to an actual file that is sort of a binary tree. But if the log just contains like an insert and then a delete, then it'll actually never get into the binary tree. And so your writes, your really fast writes, prove to just be constant order time instead of log n. So if you know anything about algorithmic complexity, that's a really nice advantage.
How did you get to that research? Did you find a white paper, blog post? You just tinker with it? Like, what got you there to get that understanding? Because, like, is that on the surface from the README?
When I was originally building the storage subsystem for Faktory, I designed it out with a few interfaces, and then I just built two different implementations. One was a RocksDB implementation, and one was a BoltDB implementation, and then I wrote a load test for it.
Wow.
And ran a load test, and the pushing and popping on queues for Bolt was about 1,000 times slower than Rocks. And even though Rocks has some disadvantages over Bolt, namely it's written in C++, so it pulls in the entire C runtime and it increases the complexity of building Faktory. The performance advantage outweighs that disadvantage.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is both these projects were born around the same time, 2013. And this reminds me, Jared, so much of the call we had with Oz. Just kind of like the perspective you have when choosing a database or a dependency, as you asked earlier. Like the process you go through for which you don't just use it because it's popular, because somebody that and respect wrote it. You kind of do your own due diligence and A/B test it in this case with Mike.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky too, because on the other side of I don't know what you would call like haphazard selection of dependencies, or like pick the first one that looks good, you go with. On the other side of that is some serious analysis paralysis, which you can get into as well. Right.
Yeah.
On the far extreme is, trying 15 different choices and running all these tests and spending months and months and still not pushing the needle forward. But that being said, I think the best way, once you've gotten to a point where maybe you've narrowed it down by features and by these other heuristics, support, the other things that Mike's been talking about, is you just got to see how it works for your use case. You can use somebody else's blog post as a waypoint for your decision, but their use case may be even just slightly different than yours. Like Mike noticed with a queue, obviously the reads and writes, the pushing and the popping happening really fast. Well, if he would have read a blog post about Bolt and not tried it for himself and just thrown it in and kept on building, he would have missed out on an opportunity to have a much better performing dependency. So,
well, Mike, maybe pontificate on that. Like, what if you hadn't done that research? What would the user experience of Faktory be if you went the other route, which was 1,000 times slower in your case? Would it just be slower, or not? Would you have released it? Where would you be at?
I think anybody who's sort of trying to build a professional caliber tool is going to have load tests of some sort and sort of performance tests, just sort of get a baseline feel of performance of the system, so that over the next few major releases you can detect regressions and that sort of thing. So I think it was just natural for me as an engineer trying to build a quality product. I just said, okay, well, I've got to build a load test here. And then, so I built it with Bolt and ran it and got 50 pushes and pops a second, and said, whoa, that's way slower than I expected it was going to be. And so once I saw that, I thought to myself, okay, I need to either tune Bolt or sort of determine what's wrong here. So I actually pinged Evan Phoenix, who is also a really well-known Ruby and Go person. And he told me about the LSM, the log structured merge design, and pointed me to LevelDB and projects like that. So Evan said, "Oh, this is not just a flag you can tune in Bolt. It's part of the design of Bolt. That is why the performance is this slow." And so that's when I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to abstract the storage out into interfaces and build another impl with LSM implementation of some sort." And looked around for LevelDB implementations, and that's when I found Rocks.
Nice. Phone a friend option, always useful.
But that's where you talk to your friends in the industry and who sort of know what they're talking about, certainly more than me at the time, and get a feeling for what's going wrong, which of your assumptions are being violated here, and my assumption was that Bolt was a good implementation for the persistence pattern that I needed, but that proved to be false. So if you're doing well, I don't want to pontificate on what the right use cases are for Bolt, but suffice it to say that Rocks has proven to be like I said, orders of magnitude faster, and so I realized that I had to go with something like Rocks. Now, I couldn't find any other level DB clone for Go that was really sort of production hardened. And that's why I went with Rocks, because, I would have preferred and loved to have seen something that was native Go.
Yeah.
Something that I could tell is running in production and is going to be supported for the next, in years. And I know that Facebook has several engineers working full time on Rocks, and they're pushing new versions all the time. So that is a very strong endorsement to use it in my own stuff.
So just found it here. We actually had Ben Johnson on the changelog back in 2015 talking about BoltDB. I think he actually compared and contrasted it with LevelDB at the time. So he's very well aware of these different architectures. And Adam, I don't think you were on that show. I think it was just me and Ben talking. We also had Ben on Go Time. He's somewhat of a regular around here as well. Great developer. And these aren't things that he would take like as a personal slight against Bolt. This is just the way that they're built. They're built for different optimizations, and BoltDB not fitting Factory's use case. Yep.
I've never met Ben. He's a Twitter friend, but he's always been a perfectly pragmatic person. And I would hope that we would have that in common. What is a tool that is awesome and appropriate for one use case could just completely fall over for another use case, and that's just software for you. So
exactly,
it is what it is. And like I said, I pinged Evan Phoenix initially because I know he's used Bolt before, just for him to sanity check. He had access to the Faktory repository from day one, just because I like to have a backup person in case I get hit by a bus who can actually sort of open source the code that I was working on at the time. And that way it's not just lost to the sands of time. But I gave Evan access from day one. And so he had access to the Faktory code. And I pointed him to the load test, and I pointed him to the storage implementation. And I said, am I going crazy here? I'm getting these kind of unusually slow numbers over what I expected. And he was the one who looked at it. So Ben just didn't have access to the repo. And so that's why I turned to Evan.
Mm-hmm. So you selected RocksDB. Now, both of those would have been embedded. Tell us about the ramifications of embedded with regards to, I guess, the practical use of Faktory. So I always think of it as people understand how to maintain Redis because it's a standalone thing. So they're used to backups, they're used to redundancy or whatever the ops side of Redis is. When you have an embedded thing, it's just like, is all your data just in that binary? Where does it store stuff? Tell us about that and how you back it up and stuff like that.
So embedded just means that the storage subsystem is running within your process. It's not running as a separate daemon over the network. So, MySQL, Postgres, Redis, all of those are sort of network storage daemons.
Right.
Whereas embedded means that it's running within my process. And my process is the Faktory process. So Faktory is both a network daemon that sort of surfaces an API that workers can call, but it also has a storage subsystem, so it can persist all the data that its APIs sort of expose. And so what that means is that Faktory basically has a storage directory on your disk where it places all these different data files that contain your persisted job data. And gotcha. All of that data is RocksDB effectively. RocksDB owns the data in that directory. And I just point RocksDB to say, here's the Faktory database. Please open it up and let's get started.
So the backups would be similar to just a disk copy.
Well,
just files on disk.
Not quite. RocksDB does surface backup and restore APIs. So you have to call the backup API and you have to call the restore API. And so Faktory exposes those APIs as a command line tool. So Faktory has a Faktory CLI command line tool where you can say Faktory CLI backup and Faktory CLI restore. And that's it. it just it does it all automatically for you based on the backups that you've taken. So I envision people taking a backup maybe every 5 minutes or every hour or whatever they want to do. And then if they find that their store has for some reason gotten corrupted or the disk breaks or whatever, then they can restore their latest backup and get back most of the data that has been lost.
So your overall take on ripping Redis, I keep calling it removing, even though it was never there, but not including Redis. Like here you are, you're in alpha, you're out there, you've seen people's feedback, you've built the system around RocksDB. Are you happy with that choice at this point? Are you having buyer's remorse, or are you missing Redis at all? How do you feel?
Well, it's been a mixed bag. Like any sort of decision, there's good and bad parts of it. With Rocks, the tools that it gives me are much lower level than Redis. I'm dealing with C++ APIs rather than a nice set of data structure commands that Redis exposes. Ultimately, Redis is a great thing. I love it. I will never consider ripping it out of Sidekiq. People have asked me to build Sidekiq for other storage engines, and my take is no way. Sidekiq is optimized for Redis, and Redis gives you a lot of like you say, built-in ops knowledge in the industry. People know how to run Redis. There are Redis SaaSes that are out there that where you can just say, hey, here's $50 a month, give me a Redis URL, and boom, now you've got something that you can run Sidekiq against. Faktory doesn't have that, but Faktory is still brand new. We're working on that. Rocks doesn't give me some of the things that Redis does have, like replication. So I can't run a replica in another availability zone or another data center and have sort of a almost real-time backup. So there are trade-offs for sure, but ultimately Redis didn't have that embedded mode that I had to have if I wanted to sort of centralize the logic into a single binary. So the ease of use of Faktory is awesome because it's just a single binary you just run, but it comes at these trade-offs of losing the built-in ops lore that Redis has in the community.
This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice. Everything we do here at Changelog is hosted on Linode servers. Pick a plan, pick a distro, and pick a location, and in seconds, deploy your virtual server. Drool-worthy hardware, SSD cloud storage, 40 gigabit network, Intel E5 processors, simple, easy control panel, 9 data centers, 3 regions, anywhere in the world they've got you covered. Head to linode.com/changelog and get $20 in hosting credit. And by TopTal. TopTal is the best place to work as a freelancer or hire the top 3% of freelance talent out there for developers, designers, and finance experts. In this segment, I talk with Josh Chapman, a freelance finance consultant at TopTal, about the work he does and how TopTal helps him legitimize being a freelancer. Take a listen.
Yeah, in my arena within TopTal, I specialize in everything from market research to business plan creation to pitch decks to financial modeling, valuation, and then that leads very naturally into fundraising strategy, capital raising strategy, investor outreach, closing a deal negotiation, how to value the company, how to negotiate that, and all those skill sets that I have continued to hone over on the TopTal side are ones that I actually deploy every single day in my own company. Freelancing can sometimes be seen as not legitimate or subpar work. Now, I would argue that when you work with a company like TopTal, they put so much vetting into not only the companies that you work with, but also the talent that you work with, which I'm on the talent side, that it adds a level of legitimacy that isn't seen across other platforms. And that, for me, as the talent side, is incredibly fruitful and awesome to be a part of, right? I enjoy the clients. I enjoy the other talent that I get to talk to. I enjoy the TopTal team. And that creates an overall positive experience, not only for TopTal, but for me as the talent and for the client as the company on the other side. And that is really not seen or is the experience across other platforms in the freelance market.
So if you're looking to freelance or you're looking to gain access to a network of top industry experts in development, design, or finance, head to toptal.com. That's TOPTAL.com and tell them Adam from the Changelog sent you. For those wanting a more personal introduction, email me, adam@changelog.com.
So, Mike, you mentioned that there is no SaaS for Faktory. There's one for Redis. You can get a Redis to go URL or your insert, Redis SaaS _ URL here. Is that a thing that, because I'm thinking what's better than having a single binary is having no binary, right? Like, let me just get my worker process and I'll just point it at a Faktory thing and be off to the races. Is that something that's on your radar?
Absolutely. 100%. That was part of when I sort of inverted the design. I realized, hey, well, if I'm centralizing all this stuff, there's no better description of centralization than SaaS, because that's really what you're doing is you're paying somebody else to sort of run this thing for you. So yeah, I've thought about it. One of the sort of decisions that I've made in the past is that I don't want to run a SaaS. I don't like the 24/7 ops situation. Well, I'm thinking about how Faktory could be used in that mode, and it can certainly be used to build a business that does that.
But you want someone else to build a business.
Exactly. So what I've thought about and what kind of the direction I want to go is I want to put out a Faktory Pro that I'm selling product that sort of is the same sort of model as Sidekiq and Sidekiq Pro and Sidekiq Enterprise that will have some additional features that aren't in the open source version. But then I can also have people who run SaaSes that can either offer Faktory for free, or they can offer Faktory Pro for an additional monthly rate, and then I take a cut of that. So I can either sell it on premises for anybody that wants to sort of run it internally, or I can offer Faktory Pro through these sort of VARs, value-added resellers that are running SaaSes. And I've already got, there's already one fellow who's expressed the desire to build a SaaS and who's already sort of announced that he's working in this direction. So I'm really curious to see what happens long-term here.
I guess I'm kind of curious of we asked earlier in the call, the state of Inspector, right? And you had success with Sidekiq, and Inspector, you kind of took down the same path with a similar open source, open core pro model, right? Yeah. And support or things added onto it. I'm just wondering if, because of the success of the Sidekiq model has been so great, that you feel like it is the right way for everything you do.
Well, I think that Inspector and Inspector Pro were less of a success. I've essentially given up on the projects myself. I guess Inspector is a very sort of, how would I describe it? It's very limited in what it does. It's sort of, it's funny, I released the 1.0 and it's kind of a 100% of the functionality that I ever wanted in it, really. And the Pro version, I guess, doesn't seem to really add that much value on top of the open source version. So I really haven't seen much uptake from the Pro. Haven't seen that many sales from it. So, and it could also be that it's kind of a nice to have, but an optional piece of infrastructure. It's not core to any application development. Whereas I think sort of background jobs and scaling sort of business transactions across many machines, that's a lot more companies around the world see that as important to their app.
Right.
So
another question on that is, Inspector is monitoring, right? I think back in the day you mentioned when we had you on the show talking about this, it was sort of, modded but better, if I can recall back to some of the things you said. But there's full on SaaS businesses around monitoring, so and the question Jared asked you was like, is this the next SaaS for you? And you said that you don't really want to do that. And so I see monitoring as this, not that I'm saying you missed it, but like this could have been potentially a SaaS, and then here you are with Faktory that could be a SaaS. And
right.
I'm not really saying anything in particular. I'm just saying like these are opportunities that could not just be open source and pro. And going back to that, is that the right model?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be that the market that I was going for, the product fit just wasn't there with the direction that the industry was going. You look at something like Datadog, it has monitoring for all these various different daemons already.
Right. They're a big business too, and one of our sponsors too. So I mean, that's
no doubt. I mean, I use them every day I use them to monitor my own hosts. So I know and love their service. So it's quite possible that there just wasn't the product fit that Sidekiq had. And we'll see if Faktory is going to fall more on the Sidekiq side or Inspector side. But so far the uptake has been nice to see. And like I said, I'm going to put another 6 months to a year into this and see what happens with Faktory. See if it grows nicely, or if it just sort of plateaus early and doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Looking at this from a macro level, which I guess Adam and I tend to do because we talk to a lot of people in open source trying to use different means and methods of sustaining their work in open source. We look at exemplars, and I think over time we've said, you've got your Red Hat style, you kind of have your GitLabs, you have your Webpack who's making open collective work. You've got Evan Yu who's making Patreon work, and you have Mike Perham who's making product, kind of a freemium, or not freemium. What do you call it? Like a pro and community edition work.
I describe it as open core.
Yeah.
Open core. Thank you. Just blank that. But then I start to ask people: is there anybody else? Like, is there another Webpack for that model? Is there another Mike? And I don't know if there is. Like, is there somebody else who's taken or done the same model that you've done in a similar scale with Sidekiq and made that exact same model work very well in a similar fashion that you have, that you know of?
Well, I know that there's been a lot of Java application servers like JBoss, or I'm probably dating myself now, but you look at WebLogic and WebSphere. They all have sort of community editions, but then they also have the big corporate enterprise version.
Right.
And typically the enterprise version has additional features like, I don't know, replication and data grid caching across the, geo-replicated data of caching and all this sort of stuff. So it is a thing to offer sort of a light community version and then a more sort of product enhanced, more enhanced commercial version on top of that. So I think the Java world, the world of application servers, and when you get right down to it, that's kind of what Sidekiq is. If you squint from really far away, Sidekiq is kind of a Ruby application server. It's using Rails for its major framework,
right?
But at the end of the day, you're doing work across. You're farming work out to a cluster of machines, and that's part of what an application server does. The only part that Sidekiq doesn't do is the sort of web side. But that makes it sort of independent of the web, or whatever the style of the day might be.
Right. Well, let's get back to Factory and as a service, the idea. So you have one person who's potentially interested. Let's say we have listeners whose ears are perking up. Perhaps they're entrepreneurial ops people with some development skills, or whoever they think they happen to be, and they're like, "Wow, I could be a value-added reseller for Mike." What's the path there? What's the process? Like hit you up on Twitter, like email you privately? Are you soliciting for people who might want to do this, or are you just hoping that one person does it and you can like make them the official Factory service?
I'm not soliciting actively, but I'm happy to entertain offers. The last thing I want is a dozen different drive-by emails from people who want me to provide 90% of the tech work, and then they just sort of spin up a bunch of Docker containers on EC2 and they're done. That's not really what I want. I'm focused on the product, on the features, and sort of kind of trying to determine what goes in the community version, what goes in a commercial version. And so I would expect a SaaS to more focus on obviously ease of spinning up an instance, but then things like reliability and sort of data storage, backups and restores, automating all that so that anybody who's using Factory doesn't have to deal with that or worry about a disk dying or something like that.
It's the last thing you want to worry about, right? It's unless you have to do that, unless you have to have that concern, you want to offload that to somebody else if you can, because you get back to doing the valuable stuff, which is building the product.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm really limited by what RocksDB offers in terms of reliability and sort of high availability. They don't provide sort of a clustering mode. They don't provide real-time replication. So the best I can offer right now is backups. So you can call the backup API once a minute or once an hour, but ultimately that's sort of what I'm limited by.
Let's talk about Factory versus Sidekiq. I'm sure we have lots of people out there using Sidekiq, and they're probably wondering, what does this mean for Sidekiq, A? And then B, should I be looking to switch off Sidekiq because Factory offers performance or security or some other thing, ease of use, that Sidekiq will never offer me? What do you say to those folks?
Okay, well, those are two great questions. First thing I want to make clear is that Sidekiq will be supported for the foreseeable future. As long as I'll say right now, for the next 10 years, Sidekiq will be supported, without a doubt.
It's a big claim.
Yeah.
10 years.
I'm making plenty of money right now where I can justify spending the next 10 years just focused on it. So, it will be around, it will be supported. I'm just an email away if people have any problems with it. As Ruby and Rails change over time, Sidekiq will change with them to work as best as it can. Where Factory shines is that Ruby itself has started to get this reputation as sort of stagnant. People aren't seeing it as the hot new thing. They're not necessarily using it to build new applications anymore. And so, Sidekiq is as robust as the Ruby community is. I mean, robust in terms of growth of my business. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to see my business stagnate over time. So part of this effort is to bring the Sidekiq conventions and opinions to all languages, and at the same time continue to grow as those conventions and opinions grow more popular in all these different languages. Hopefully, my business will grow also. So the question of should I use Sidekiq or should I use Factory? Well, first of all, Factory only has a quarter of the features that that Sidekiq has today. So if you need something reliable today and you want to use Ruby, Sidekiq is the natural choice. But over the next year or two, Factory will continue to get more features. It will, presuming that the open source version gets traction, it will see a commercial version that has more features in it. And what you get with that is you get the polyglot design. So now, whatever language your business decides to use in the future, you can use Factory with it. So it's a little more future-proof. As the winds of the industry change and languages come and go, hopefully Factory will be there in all those new languages.
Yeah, whereas, so with Sidekiq, both the users and the business is locked into Ruby, but with Factory, like you said, your business is now future-proof in terms of reaching the hot new interesting platforms and languages, but also as your users' businesses change, they are not locking themselves in. They can continue to grow and adapt their applications and not have to swap out their backgrounding infrastructure to do that.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I see my value as not I'm selling you a bunch of Ruby code and thus limiting myself. What I'm selling is the conventions and the opinions that a really nice feature-rich background job system gives you. And ideally, that will scale to any programming language. Maybe not assembly language, but hopefully everything else.
Cool. Well, let's end with a little bit of a roadmap. Tell us where Factory, where you're aiming at for 1.0 perhaps, and what's coming down the pipeline, and then we'll talk about how people can hop in and help out.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, the initial announcement was 2 weeks ago. I'm preparing the second sort of alpha release right now. I've gotten probably about half a dozen to a dozen different contributors that have really sort of populated the chat room and started submitting PRs. I mean, I'm getting pretty close to 100 PRs now, just in the last 2 weeks, which is awesome.
Wow.
I've had people contribute several major features, including job prioritization. So Sidekiq never had job prioritization, where you could say, like, in this queue, this job has priority 9, or this job has priority 1, like as in, high or low priority.
Which one to run first? Yeah.
Yeah, because people would ask me, how do I, my queue is backed up. I've got 1,000 jobs. I want to push this job to the front of the queue. And my answer was always, well, you need to have a separate queue, which is like
put it in its own queue. Right.
Yeah. And so, and that's because Redis didn't have a really good data structure for doing that really efficiently. Whereas now that I control the storage subsystem, I can implement that easily. And so a fellow named Andrew Stuckey sort of really took a shine to Factory when it was first announced, and he suggested this feature, and I said, it sounds great, although I'm not sure how to implement it. And then this guy went along and just implemented it for me. So he really is the MVP of this next release. He did a great job on implementing this thing. But yeah, so now if you have you have the default queue and you push 1,000 jobs to it, now you can say priority 9, and that job will go all the way to the front of the queue, and it'll be the next one popped off, even though it was the last one pushed.
Nice.
So that I think people will find that really nice for sort of that use case of having like emergency jobs, where you might have jobs that are sort of system generated, and those are just normal jobs, but then you also have user waiting type jobs.
Right.
And you want those jobs to fire off ASAP. That's where job prioritization really starts to shine.
That's smart.
Yeah, so that'll be in the next release, which I'm hoping will come out in the next week. We're putting some polish into a Docker image so that people will be able to download Factory straight from Docker Hub and run it right on their machine in seconds, rather than having to build everything manually. We also landed a homebrew recipe so that people can actually install it from homebrew on OS 10 directly. Sorry, it's called Mac OS now, I guess, right? I'm so old school, I call it OS 10 still.
Yeah.
So yeah, just in the last 2 weeks, the open source community response has been awesome, and it's been really invigorating to already have a few. Like I've already landed 2 or 3 committers into the project who've submitted multiple PRs and thereby earned the right to be a committer. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But the plan is over the next couple months, over the winter, to sort of stabilize Factory, evangelize its use, try to get people starting to use it, maybe even in staging or even in production if they're a little bit crazy, and also try and get some trusted comrades that can maintain the worker libraries. I maintain the Ruby and the Go version, the Ruby and Go worker libraries, but there's all those other ones that you mentioned that all have their own independent maintainers, and I need to ensure that those maintainers stay up to date with the latest changes in Faktory, especially since it's so amorphous right now. It hasn't really solidified yet. We're still changing the protocol. We're still adding new commands every week. So over the next couple months, that'll solidify, and we'll really get a reliable set of commands that all the workers will support.
That was one, just real quick, Mike, that was one thing. We recently did have the RabbitMQ team on. They've been doing it for 10 years. So we had them on to talk about their 10-year anniversary of RabbitMQ, and really they shared a lot of lessons that they learned throughout that time, because they've made all the mistakes and had successes along the way, and they were very open with us to talk about those things. One of the things they said, which they've I guess they've said that they've regretted to a certain degree, is that there are so many client libraries in various states of quality and support and maintenance. And they're not, they have a couple that are first party, just like in your circumstance, although you're just getting started with Faktory, is they weren't always diligent to, bring those people along and keep those things quality. And I can't remember the exact wording, but really just, I guess, helping that ecosystem flourish in a way where, for your particular language, there's a high quality worker library available, which may not be, developed by you or people that are employed by you, but the people who are working on it are keeping it up to date, are keeping it, well tested and well documented, is hugely valuable to Faktory as an overall ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. And earlier I mentioned that if Faktory sees some success, I might be hiring people. I think hiring people to maintain the worker libraries, in addition to maintaining the core Faktory repo, would be a natural fit. These people
Absolutely.
have shown an interest in the background job system. They've shown that they have the willpower to sort of learn a new system and dive in and sort of build something on top of it, and that goes a long ways in building up a resume that says that recommends them to. So we'll see what happens over time, but hopefully I can get half a dozen libraries for different languages that are well maintained and reliable, because it really doesn't take more than that. You need a JavaScript, you need a Python, you need possibly like a Java or a C# library, and that's going to get you 90% of the industry,
right?
And everything can kind of fall out from there. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's close with a call to action or some sort of thing that people can do if they're interested. Obviously, we'll have all the links in the show notes to the typical pages. But if you had a specific thing that you could say to the open source community with regards to Faktory or what you're up to, what would you ask of them?
I would just suggest that they download and run the Docker image that we're going to publish for the next release, and sort of take it out for a spin. Click around the web UI and sort of see what it can do. And we'll try and publish like a Rails app that can be used to do work against Faktory, because there's a couple moving parts here, so it's not a trivial thing to just sort of download and run. But I'll do my best to make that easy, and hopefully the listeners can take it for a spin and see what it's all about.
You mentioned that you can install it via Homebrew as well, and you have to tap that first. You have a tap because it's still kind of in flux.
Yeah, I think it's a cask or a tap or something like that.
Brew
I
tap
forget.
contribsys/factory and then brew install factory. So
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
we got.
So I guess it is a tap. All right.
Tap that.
Got. We'll link up the installation docs, which also has your Docker and Linux information there as well in the show notes. And then you also have Gitter. So you mentioned earlier being able to chat. So I guess if anybody wants to talk to you in real time, they can go to your Gitter chat room for this.
Yeah, I'm not in there all the time, but I'm trying to jump in when I can.
Yeah.
I do find real-time chat to be kind of a time sink. So I have been jumping into it the last couple of weeks just because, I'm trying to get people ramped up and started with the system. And we've when I initially released it, I didn't really have any easy way for people to get started with it. So the chat room and me walking them through it was really the only way. But now that we got Homebrew and we got Docker, I think it's easier for people to get started without having to get, directions directly from me.
Yeah. That's good. It invites the community to gather around it, and that's a good place to go at least. And even if you're not there all the time, it's a good central location to at least queue up some things.
Yeah, and there'll be other people in there all the time too. I'm sure some seasoned pros with Factory pros who have upwards of 2 weeks of knowledge of the system.
Upwards of 2 weeks.
that can help answer questions.
Good one. Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you back. I mean, I'm so thrilled to see our paths continue to align, and then your continued success. And don't take my questions earlier as anything negative towards the success you've done, because you're certainly a model for success when it comes to sustaining open source and your family and building a business around it. Like, you're very much a model for people to follow. We appreciate you sharing your time.
Thanks. I appreciate the kind words.
All right, thanks for tuning into the show this week. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend, tweet about it, and thank you to our sponsors, Auth0, Linode, GoCD, and TopTal. Also, thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. We host everything we do on Linode cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out. Support this show. The Changelog is hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and Jared Santo. Editing is by Jonathan Youngblood. And the awesome music you've been hearing is produced by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder, and you can find more shows just like this at changelog.com or by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.